welcome, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Remixing Politics and Culture with me, your host, Pam. I'm so thankful to have you stop by this evening to share some of your Sunday evening with me and my guests. I am a public relations and marketing professional with a passion for social justice, voter advocacy, and culture. And tonight we have two very special guests who will be talking about our most precious gift, our children. Tonight's subject headline is How do we ensure positive childhoods for our kids in America? So first we have up, for the first time to the show, we have, hold on one second. We have Sharon Hirsch. Sharon serves as the president and CEO of Prevent Child Abuse North Carolina, where she leads a team that focuses on making prevention a priority for North Carolina, building capacity for communities to have the knowledge, support, and resources to prevent child abuse and neglect. Sharon has more than 30 years' experience in nonprofit and government agency management, public relations, advocacy, and child well-being. At PCANC, she has led efforts to catalog community prevention plans, has increased staff capacity to provide supports for evidence-based parenting programs, and has secured more than $1 million in new investments in PCANC. Welcome, Sharon, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Pam.
Absolutely. And next we have Marcia Brown-Williams. This is Marcia's second time to the show. She is a proud graduate of Spelman College with 2 degrees, one in child development and the other in economics. She was an elementary school teacher for the Chicago Public Schools for 30 years. For 10 of those 30 years, Marcia taught kindergarten, first grade, and third grade students. She also became a reading coordinator for the Gifted Magnet program. Marcia left education, but never the children, as she is the executive director and board member of Shaping America's Youth, Project SAY, which is a mentoring program designed to mentor Black and Hispanic children, teens, and young adults in a variety of life skills. Marcia also serves as a housing counselor with a HUD-supported agency, assisting people with a host of housing concerns and other issues. Welcome, Marcia, back to the show.
Thank you so much, Pam. I really appreciate you inviting me back.
Absolutely. Now, I have to say, first off, I know that April is Child Abuse Prevention Month, Awareness Month, rather. And, but, you know, as I was thinking about this topic, it seems like there's so much more to just child abuse prevention than meets the eye of what we traditionally think of. And with that in mind, Sharon, I'm going to start with you. I know that you've been an advocate and protector of children in various capacities for years. How has the recent trends of violence done to and committed by children, our youth, impacted your work?
Well, thanks for that great question. Let me clarify, too, that it is Child Abuse Prevention Month. We're really focused upstream on prevention. The pandemic has really impacted children in a very concerning way, but it's also one where we know children are resilient and they can bounce back. And it's been very encouraging to see things like here in North Carolina that our children are starting to catch up again to where they need to be at grade level in school. We know that when families are overloaded with stress, that's when abuse and neglect is more likely to happen, and that in turn can ripple into violence in the community. And the last 8 or 10 years have been incredibly stressful, and the last 3 in particular with the pandemic. And so that's why all the work that we're doing, not all of it, but most of it, is focused on raising awareness about the things we need to do to reduce that overload of stress. Because when you're stressed out and it's toxic stress, that's when you get the fight, flight, or freeze response to traumatic events. And we're seeing that not just individually and in some communities, we're seeing it everywhere.
Yes.
All of us are very stressed, and our children and young families are in particular.
Okay. All right. In fact, I have a chart that I'll share later with you all about some of these things. So, Marcia, as an educator for over 30 years in the Chicago public school system, teachers are truly on the front lines to check in with our youth, to ring the alarm when they see issues. What were some of the signs that you looked for to determine if a child needed help for any reason?
That is really a great question, because I've had several incidents where I did have to confer with our principal, and we had to decide what to do next. I'll never forget this. I had a kindergarten classroom, and I had this little boy. He was really a smart kid. His mom, on the other hand, she seemed to be all over the place, not very stable-like. And yet at 5, he knew what he needed to do in order to get to school. And one day, it was the winter time. I'll never forget this. One day, he got to school late. He had a sister who was in preschool. This baby did the best job possible. He and his sister were wearing shorts to school. I don't know if they couldn't find their winter coats or whatever, but he put on his little sister 2 sweaters and a denim jacket, and he had on 2 windbreakers and a sweater, and they walked in the cold to our school. And when I saw him, I didn't want to sound too alarmist. So I said, could you just stay right here for just a minute? I said, because I just got to go next door, and I had the kids doing something. And I went and told my principal what was going on. He said, well, bring them in here. And so I told him, I said, I just want to introduce you to the principal, just in case you didn't know him, because he just really likes you and he wants to talk to you. And he said, oh, okay. So he goes into the office. Principal was very nice. He asked him some questions. Then they called the social worker, and they came into the room. They saw how he was dressed. I told them about his sister. They went down there, and Mom was a drug addict. She had just disappeared and left those 2 babies at home. But he still knew to come to school.
Yeah. And probably when you came to school, did you guys have lunch? You had lunch and
he had breakfast, because even though he got there late, I knew he was hungry. So I took him and his sister to the lunchroom, told the lunchroom manager what I suspected. And she said, don't worry about it. I got him. And she fed them. And then she brought them back to their classrooms, the little girl to her room and the little boy back to my room. So he knew that was a safe haven for him at that moment. And we're just trying to scramble around the school, trying to find some clothing for them so they could wear it and go home. But we eventually had to call DCFS, and his grandparents came and picked them up. And so they had, I guess, temporary custody of the kids until Mom could get her act together. And then a second time, Chicago's got some really incredible situations. I had first grade, and I'll never forget this little boy. He would come to school every morning, and he would fall asleep the first hour. Didn't know why. And at first I was waking him up, and then I realized he needed this rest. I stopped waking him up, and I would let him wake himself up. And you could tell he wanted to learn, but he was so tired. Then one day we were going on a field trip, and one of my parents came to pay for her child's field trip. She saw the little boy. She said, Miss Williams, can I talk to you outside in the hallway? And I said, sure. She said, I didn't know you had so-and-so in your room. I said, Yeah. She said, let me just say this to you. We have called DCFS twice.
Mm-hmm.
Mom is selling out her son to the gangs to sell drugs
Oh,
until 3 o'clock in the morning. And I said, are you kidding me? And she said, no, because they know that if he gets picked up, he's not going to serve any time. He's 6. He's 6 years old. So again, I had to talk to my principal, and we had to call DCFS again.
mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking to myself, how do you do that to a 6-year-old child? And it's your child.
Yeah, well,
It's your child.
yeah.
But it's amazing the kind of situations a lot of these kids have to deal with.
Right, right.
And if they don't have an advocate who's going to look out for them,
Mm-hmm.
what happens is they turn out to be hostile, angry,
Mm-hmm.
trying to get whatever they can at any means necessary.
Right. And let me pivot at that point, Sharon, because that's a very good point. What Marcia is bringing up about how young children even develop in those negative, toxic ways and what comes of them. So, could you please explain to the audience what ACEs is?
Sure. So, adverse childhood experiences are household kinds of negative experiences that children can have. And the adverse childhood experiences study was first done back in the late 1990s. It's been more than 25 years. And it was a study that was done by Kaiser Permanente and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And it looked at 17,000 people that were covered and insured by Kaiser Permanente, and they compared their health outcomes as adults to 10 different adverse experiences that could have happened to them in childhood. The different forms of physical, emotional abuse and neglect, sexual abuse, substance abuse in the home, separation of children from their parents, things that could happen in the household, and found a dose-response relationship between what happens in childhood and health outcomes. People are more likely to be depressed if they've experienced multiple adverse childhood experiences. 5 of the top 10 leading causes of death in the United States are correlated to adverse childhood experiences. So, and now we've done more research across the country and understand adverse community experiences also impact children's health and development. And those include low wages, lack of access to affordable housing, historic trauma, racism, discrimination, all the things that are kind of in the groundwater and are part of the context and environment that children live in. And so it's really important that we tackle those root causes of why families experience the things that they do. And we know that even when you just look at the original 10 adverse childhood experiences, that substance abuse in the home and separation of children from parents, those things are so deeply embedded in why kids are abused and neglected as well. I mean, the 2 stories that Marcia just told about substance abuse in the home, it's often a very big risk factor for abuse and neglect. But at the same time, we know that all those things are 100% preventable if we just invest in kids and families, and particularly their economic supports from the start. If we're able to provide more resources to families, they're not going to be as overloaded by stress, and it's less likely that abuse and substance addiction will happen in the home.
Right. So here's my thing. When we hear prevent child abuse, we typically, and at least I do, we typically think of the normal thing of some type of physical abuse and maybe a little less of the emotional abuse or something. And yet both are equally and can be just as damaging as the other. So explain to me how these both of you have this experience. How do these social determinants impact your work now? Sharon, I will be willing to bet when you first started off, maybe you were a social worker, right? Did you?
I'm actually not a social worker.
No.
No, but I've worked in social services.
Right. So the thing is that you've done this type of work for years. And so how do you go from, instead of, and making, maybe, I hope that you're doing some type of lobbying efforts with some of these legislators, because how can we convince them that policy directly impacts our children, which directly impacts these outcomes that we're seeing constantly on the news?
Well, you're exactly right. And one of the things that I think is so important for us to understand, particularly because I think when people hear the name of our organization, Prevent Child Abuse North Carolina, they think of the CPS foster care system.
Exactly.
And we are very focused on addressing the root causes and, and trying to make sure that that never happens for more children. Yes. And one of the things that we've particularly been focusing on is child neglect. When we look at the statistics nationwide, 75% of CPS cases are for neglect. By comparison, emotional abuse is 6% of the cases. Physical abuse is 17%. But when we think about that 75% that's neglect, it's often conflated with poverty. Right. And it's really important that we not do that, because families that are poor love their children, want to do the best for their children. Sometimes they're reported for neglect because they've left their children at home alone. It's because they have 2 or 3 jobs. Right. We need to be looking more deeply at what's happening and think about how do we support families. And one of the things we've done in the last couple of years is that we've done a review of what the literature says about how economic supports can prevent abuse and neglect from happening, particularly neglect. And every time we put more money in the hands of families, abuse and neglect rates drop. For example, for every $1,000 that states are investing in poverty to address financial stability, housing, child care, and even health care, abuse and neglect rates drop, reports drop, foster care placement drops, and child fatalities drop. And for some reason in our culture, that's very counterintuitive for a lot of our policymakers. We know.
What do you think that is?
Well, I think we've got a pull yourself up by your bootstraps, individual responsibility kind of mentality in our country that dominates. And so much of our systems are based on, our economic system is based on, it was started with slavery and free labor. Yeah. And so I mean, that's at the root of a lot of this.
Really? I mean, Marcia, I've never heard it explained that way before.
Well, think about it. We know that paid family leave, for example, will save babies' lives, not only because it puts more money in the hands of parents, but it fosters parent-child attachment in those first weeks and months of a baby's life that are so important for early childhood brain development. Yes. We know minimum wage states, for every $1 that states have increased their minimum wage, there's a 9.6% reduction in child neglect reports. 9.6. We haven't increased our minimum wage since 1996.
Right, we haven't.
And it's fascinating to me. I'm going to be doing a presentation about this later this week. But child neglect rates have remained really steady since the 1990s, right through today. Physical abuse and sexual abuse have dropped pretty substantially, which is really good news, good news. But neglect rates haven't. And it's because we're often conflating poverty with neglect, and we're not providing supports to families. We have, in 1996, we created welfare reform and the TANF program, and very few families receive cash assistance anymore. We've made it more difficult to get help. Right. And one of the questions that I'm starting to ask is, we pay foster parents between $550, $600, almost $700 a month, depending on the age of children. It's really important that we do that. But what if we gave that money first to birth families to help get them stabilized? What would be different if we gave those families that money first?
Exactly.
Right.
That would help. That would be so beneficial.
Right.
You know what? And I'm hearing what you guys are saying. And I was reading one of the comments somebody put up about how trauma is woven into the fabric of some of our communities, especially in the African American community, especially in some of the, underserved communities. They don't have the kind of resources that other high middle class neighborhoods have. It's at their beck and call. I have to say, I led a very sheltered life because I didn't see all of these kind of issues growing up. My parents were well educated. We lived in a really nice house, in a nice neighborhood. And so I didn't see all of this until I became a teacher. And then here I was, this young woman, teaching school and seeing how these kids had to adapt and trying to maneuver their lives because of the circumstances that they were in. I mean, I would have kids who would come in, they would be hungry in the morning and they would just miss the breakfast. And I have to go down there and beg the lunchroom people, can you please they're really hungry. I don't want them to not have a good start, And they would be nice enough and give the kids something to eat for breakfast and all. But their families didn't think of that for them. And the thing that these kids learn are ways of how to survive, not how to live. And they don't think in terms of, getting educated and making a very good life for them, because that's not something that they are told and something that they see. So you see that and you see how that can really benefit your life. You just do it by osmosis. It's not something that somebody has to beat you over the head with. For these kids, they have to see how this is going to benefit them. Because see, they have no concept of how this is going to benefit them. And their parents, God bless them, they didn't have that kind of, parents who could give them, that they could look at for parenting skills for their own children.
Right.
They didn't see that because their own parents didn't know how to be that kind of person. And I was just thinking about what Susan was saying. A lot of these parents, they got 2 or 3 jobs.
Right.
So they can keep a roof over their heads, yet alone, buy them all of the things that most people buy for their children.
Right. Sharon, one of the things that when I was reading your bio, you talked about the parenting education component. I wish we could get a license for people to become parents. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't it be wonderful if he had to pass something that says, okay, you're suitable to become a parent, and then we would eliminate a lot of problems.
Well, I also wish that we normalized taking a parenting class. That was something that everyone does. And I think we're really lucky. Pam and I both live in Durham, North Carolina, where the Family Connects program was created. And that's a universal home visiting program. Every single newborn in Durham County receives a home. Their mom and dad receive a home visit after their baby's born, and they can get up to 3 visits. And that starts to normalize that it's okay to ask for help. One of the things that I find fascinating is that new moms and pregnant moms and dads go to childbirth classes.
Yes.
Yeah. And labor and delivery doesn't last but a day for most of us. And it takes 25 years for those babies' brains to fully develop. We should all be taking a parenting class at some point or another and know that it's okay to ask for help. There's no way anybody can raise a child by themselves.
No.
That old saying, it takes a village, really, really is the truth. And I particularly want to say to you, Marcia, you are, the research also shows that the presence of one stable, caring adult in the life of a child can buffer the impact of the trauma that they've experienced and make a difference for their life outcomes. And you've probably done that for hundreds, maybe thousands of children.
And I still have some of my students who still keep in contact with me. I mean, they're grown, have their own families now. I've been to weddings, baby showers, the whole 9 yards. And a couple of our kids in our mentoring program have even gone to college and graduated, something that they never thought in a million years that they would be able to do. But, and I wasn't one of those, oh, sweetie pie, you know, I wasn't. But I always told them, God didn't forget you. You do have a great brain, and I expect only but great things from you. And see, if you hear that enough, you start believing that I am great. I have a great brain, and she believes that she only wants great things to come from me. And so, you know, I had to always tell, like, my students that I had before me and the kids in the mentoring program that I know that they could do great things in their lives, because they needed to hear that instead of always being told what they couldn't do and how are you going to do this and all that kind of stuff, you know.
Right. Ladies, I want to pivot. I want to pivot to the big unspoken elephant in the room, because we are in a crisis mode with our kids. We're in a crisis mode, period, in America, period, point blank, period. I hope to be able to share this screen so that you and the audience can see something, this statistic that I found. Hold on one second. Okay. Let me know if you can see it. Can you see it? Child and teen firearm mortality in the U.S.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can see the email, but I don't see the chart.
We don't see anything else with that.
Chart? No.
I don't know. Why is it doing that? I have been having this issue with StreamYard.
Oh, really?
You don't see a chart at all. You just see the email.
We just see the email.
Yep.
Okay, hold on. Let me. Still the same thing, right?
We don't see anything now, just us.
Okay. I'm just gonna. Okay, I don't know what happened. Sorry about that, but it was a chart that I wanted to share with you, and it was us and all the other countries, and we're number one with firearms being the number one cause of death. It used to be car accidents.
Right, yeah.
Now it's firearms. And even the numbers on the firearms, and this study was in 2022, so it was last year. It was just under 5,000 of youth killed with firearms.
Wow.
This year we're already, and this is only, what month is this? Is April.
Right.
We're already 11,000. 11,000. I don't know if it was murder. Yeah, it might be that.
11,000. Yeah.
So listen, when I see these, and unfortunately they're Congress people with these portraits with their children with these big long guns and all of this type of thing, Sharon, how is that not a form of child abuse? I mean, help me out. What is that? Well,
it is does not meet the technical definitions in our statutes. But it's concerning because it's glorifying violence,
right?
And it's making access to lethal weapons much too easy.
Yes.
It's deeply concerning. I was in Greensboro a couple of weeks ago for a Child Abuse Prevention Month event, and they told us that in their community they did a survey of teenagers, and the teens said that, I think it was 30% of teens said that they could get their hands on a weapon within 30 minutes without their parents knowing.
Wow. Wow.
And that's just,
Wow.
And,
I mean,
and
that's just,
Greensboro is not a Chicago, Marcia.
no, it's not.
A big city, you know, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Not at all. Not at all.
They can't get guns like that here in Chicago, but that's amazing to me. But you know what they can get guns from?
Where?
They go to Indiana, just
Oh,
like
across
that.
the border.
Right across the
Mhm.
border. They don't have to get any guns any longer from a straw person any longer. They can just go straight to Indiana, go to any of those gun shows, get as many guns as they want if they can pay for it, and come back over across the state line.
Well, and
See,
we've had 3 years of our children not having the normal socialization that they should have had either.
Yeah, and that's
And you mix those two things together, and the hormones and the you know, remember what it's like to be a teenager? I mean, it was awful. Your self-esteem was terrible. You were worried about what other people thought about you. You never felt like you fit in. And you add that the mix of all of those things, and kids can get despondent. It's that the easy access to guns is a really, really big concern. And we're the only, and Ronald is right in his comments, we're the only Western country that allows this number of guns in our society and has them so easily accessible to the general public.
They said right now the United States has over 150 million guns in many of our citizens' homes. 150 million, and we have 50 million people in the country.
yeah.
And here we got 150 million guns. And they were showing on television in one of the news segment of this 6-year-old whose father took him to a gun show to buy him get this, guys, an RA-7 semi-automatic weapon.
For what? See,
for what purpose?
That's what I'm talking about. How can that be? There is nowhere in your parenting manuals that it says, it talks about role modeling and things like that of appropriate behavior. Since when is that considered okay behavior? I'm saying we can't be, we're not even the wild, wild west, because people had structure and norms and stuff. I mean, this is ridiculous.
Well, Pam, we read a book a couple of years ago called How Social Change Happens. It talks about how social movements work. And it was things like recycling and how did we get gay marriage so quickly? What were some of the things that underlie that? And they talked in that book, it talked about the National Rifle Association. And one of the things that we talk about a lot at Prevent Child Abuse is the importance of connections. We have a whole campaign called Connections Matter that talks about how important the relationships are that children have with their parents, with their peers, that parents have a network of support, that they know who they can reach out to, even in the community-based organizations. But the NRA understands that people need to be connected to one another. And I didn't realize this until I read the book. The NRA does a beautiful job of creating community. They have local barbecues. They have local gatherings where people feel connected.
Barbecues.
Yeah, they do.
They do. And that's how they have developed a culture around families owning guns and having guns, because that's where these families are connected with one another. And we've got to find a way to connect with one another to talk about what it would look like for us to have a peaceful society, and what it means to be nurturing and caring for one another in the same way. And
now,
I'm seeing good comments in the chat around this too.
Now I have to say this though, as being an educator in schools and things, you would see certain things that you knew weren't right. And even if you brought it up to the administrator of the school, not all administrators were born of the same cloth. Okay. They just had a different mindset. And if you said, I kind of suspect something's going on here, just want to get your feedback on what you think too, because this is what I'm looking at. I'm noticing this, that, and the other.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen where principals of schools have said, well, it's not really our business. It's like, yeah, it is. It's our business. And they don't want to get too involved with what's going on in this child's home life or what may be affecting this child in certain behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about what Sharon was saying about how the past 3 years with the and how the kids were isolated, and it really had a telling kind of mindset for those kids. When they start coming back to the school,
mm-hmm.
it was like night and day. I mean, you saw more fights at the school between the students, and then they were starting to attack their teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Once upon a time, that was not something you would just see on a frequent basis. Now, you hear about all these reports of how these kids are now not only attacking each other, but they're attacking the adults in the building.
Right. They are.
And you don't know how to try to tamper. I'm going to tell you, as a teacher, you don't know exactly what to do. You know that there's something that needs to be done. You don't want them to be punished harshly because you know what they need is counseling. But they're slow on trying to get the kind of help these kids need as well in the schools.
Sharon, and piggybacking off of what Marcia is saying, what do you hear a lot of feedback from educators here in North Carolina about how things have changed and what can they do as far as reporting, seeing the red flags, what is the appropriate course of action? Because look at what happened just down the road from us in Virginia with that 6-year-old and a gun.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, we don't hear a lot about that from schools. There is a big movement in North Carolina for trauma-informed schools, and that may be something that can be really helpful. A big part of what we learned during the pandemic, though, was we already knew that pediatricians and teachers are the largest source of reports for child protective services. And so reports dropped really dramatically during the pandemic.
Yes.
And we had concrete economic supports for families during the pandemic.
Yes,
we had a child tax credit that was increased to $3,000 per child. And we believe that was a big factor in why reports also dropped. When I talk to DSS directors across the state, they tell me that since schools have come back, reports have increased, but the reports that they had during the pandemic were severe physical abuse or sexual abuse. They didn't have many reports for neglect. But since schools have come back, the neglect cases have skyrocketed again, and opioid and drug-related cases, addiction-related cases have increased again. Yeah. And it's causing a real crisis in foster care. We keep hearing stories of children who are living at DSS offices in North Carolina. We can't find foster parents, which is heartbreaking. But we know that if we gave those families that funding again, that we did during the pandemic, we could prevent a big portion of this. Yes. And Pam, because you also work with social services, our child welfare system is overwhelmed. Yeah. The staff that work there do incredible work, but the caseloads are really, really high. It's very difficult. There's a lot of secondary trauma in that work. If we could address those neglect cases that have been conflated with poverty, so that the social workers could really spend the time on the cases that really need the intervention, really need the treatment. Right. We could see better outcomes and more equitable outcomes.
So it sounds like to me that being poor, the whole concept of why are people poor is it just snowballs. Poverty just snowballs into so many other issues. And you have mentioned twice now, because we did. You know, the Biden administration, when they gave those child care tax credits and stuff, it was like 10 million kids were lifted up out of poverty.
It was the lowest poverty rate we've ever had in our country.
That's right.
We went from 17% to 5.6%.
Yeah, and that's enough. And so what's so hard about keeping that? That's what I don't. Why can't we keep that? That makes sense. That's good money.
That's good policy
and good policy. I don't.
We have 2 senators who have decided that that's not a good thing to continue on.
Let them live off of what those parents have.
One is from Arizona, one is from West Virginia. And they have been the 2 who have stopped a lot of that stuff to be passed in the Senate. I can't wait till the Democrats get at least 2 more senators in their realm.
That's why the other reason in this conversation, and even why I started this show, is that voting matters, people. Voting matters. And if you can, policy is everything, because to lift 10 million children out of poverty, come on.
Yeah. And it shouldn't be a hard thing, because if you can give that kind of money, and I'm for the United States giving money to Ukraine, I really am. But if you can give that kind of money to Ukraine, you can give a couple of $100 million to the kids who actually, and their families who actually need the help. I don't see how that can be an if and or kind of situation. When you have people here, you should not put people in dire straits when you have the ability to assist them. And they're not asking you to give them all the money in the world. That $3,000 or whatever was such a big help to them. And that's all they were asking for, a little help. The city of Chicago and the state of Illinois, they have decided to decrease the SNAP benefits, the food supplement.
Meantime, groceries have gone up, but unfortunately, the federal program that gave you the pandemic benefit, it went away in March, at the end of March, and it's and people were already lined up at the food banks and what have you because of inflation. When you see stuff rise like in a blink of an eye, didn't I just buy that coffee and then all of a sudden it went up a whole $1? Or stuff like that. It really has made, I'm just buying for myself, and it's crazy.
Well, and I just want to remind you again that minimum wage has not been increased.
Right.
Since what year was that?
1996.
Oh my God. Isn't it ridiculous?
Well, I think it was it was around that time. I'm trying to remember when we last lifted it, but it's been 20 years.
It's $7. Is it still $7.25 an hour?
In North Carolina, now in Illinois, they have raised it up to $13. So they have raised it up to $13. And I think it's supposed to go up to $15 in 2 more years.
I think Durham has 13, but I don't think they're.
It's not for everyone, Pam. It's a living wage in Durham, and the city and county government have agreed to pay people a living wage, and I believe Duke University now has as well. But that's not binding on all employers. It's those 3 entities as employers.
Right. Yeah. Ron Charles's statement: our society is creating a generation of dysfunctional children who will soon become adults. Judy, I got yours too about higher ed and how the kids are more having mental illnesses. Dwayne says Republicans only care about the child when it comes out of the womb. After that, it's about their donors. Well said, Dwayne. Well said. Well said.
I also want to emphasize that the policies that I've been talking about don't have to be partisan.
No, they don't.
They don't. And what I try to emphasize is what the data tells us, right? What the evidence tells us, to try to educate everyone, because we need everyone to understand this. Yes, so that we can make a change. Our children are really suffering, and our families are really suffering, and it impacts everything. If our kids don't have what they need now, their brains aren't going to develop so that they become that's our future workforce.
Yes.
That's the future prosperity and well-being of our country. We've got to invest in our children. And that shouldn't matter what side of the political aisle you sit on. This is about and this is about all of us because it impacts all of us.
Right.
When we talk about our work a lot, in North Carolina, we spend more than $4,000 every single minute on the downstream consequences of child abuse and neglect. And that's what we pay for in our healthcare system. It's in our criminal justice system. It's in social services. But where the biggest chunk of that expense is in lost worker productivity.
Thank you.
And that's because adults that experience that trauma as children and it was never addressed are sick.
Right.
They're depressed. They're missing work. They develop cancer. They develop diabetes, high blood pressure, all of these things that get in the way of people being productive, contributing citizens who contribute to the prosperity of our country. If we invest more in our children, all of us will be better off. All of us will. We have to remember that we're all connected and that we're all in this together.
Exactly.
Now, I find this kind of interesting too. Years ago, especially when I started off as an educator, in schools in the city of Chicago and most of the state of Illinois, they used to have classes, parenting classes for parents at the school. And believe it or not, we would have a nice sizable audience that would come for these classes. And it would be during the day, during the school day in certain rooms, or it would be in the evening. To make it so anybody could come, whether it was early in the day or later in the evening. And that used to be very helpful. And then after they had it for so many years like that, they just took it away. And we have been trying, teachers and other educators are trying to get that program back into the schools. Because one thing is, you can get parents to the school if there's some kind of function going on at the school. And when those services were being offered at their child's school, those parents would come. They would come. But
you're exactly right. And there's a movement to recreate and rebuild family resource centers all across the country. And that's what you're talking about and many of them, family resource centers are based in schools because that's where families are. That's where the children are. And those family resource centers offer parenting programs. They offer some access to concrete supports, like sometimes it's diapers, sometimes it's food, sometimes it's clothing.
Right, exactly.
And it's about how the community supports one another. And then it's normalized. And it's okay to go there and ask for help.
Right.
Because it's mutual help. It's mutual, it's that, parenting is hard and sometimes you just need somebody else to talk to who's gone through it.
Exactly. We need each other. We really need each other. You know what? I'm going to ask you, Sharon, to do this since you're the president and CEO of Prevent Child Abuse North Carolina. I think you should include in your parenting classes how it is not appropriate to have them posing with guns as they are toys and things like that. I'm serious. I know I'm not trying to be funny, but I'm really serious about that because every time I see that crap and then they think it's cute. There's nothing cute about that stuff.
I know.
It's not cute, funny, humorous, entertaining. Not when literally, guys, every week. I mean, there was another mass shooting at a prom event in Jasper, Texas before we came on. I read about it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a bunch of kids, they said no life-threatening injuries thus far, but it was a bunch of them, like 9 were shot. At a prom event. Come on. Your big rite of passage thing. I don't know what I would do right now if I had children that were school age. I would be a basket case because I'd be.
Yeah, I was telling somebody that right now, teachers, educators, anybody who works in a school, especially students, are sitting ducks right now because anybody can come into a school. And that young woman who shot through the glass doors through that Christian school,
Yes,
the
in
doors
Tennessee.
locked, but she blew right through the school door and was able to get in the building
Right.
and kill those 6 people. So
Mm.
I don't, and one of the other things too, that when kids see this kind of behavior, they start thinking it's normal. When they
Exactly.
start seeing this, they think it's normal. That's why that 6-year-old thought he could bring a gun and shoot his teacher, because he was mad with her, because he sees it as being normal. And this is what really got me too. In Indiana, in their state legislators, they just passed a bill saying the teachers can be armed in the classroom. I was like,
It
yeah.
didn't help those people at the Christian church school, because several of them, Sharon, I don't know if you've read this or not, several of them did have weapons.
Oh,
So what good does it do? What are you supposed to do? You're teaching the kids and you're supposed to have the gun on your hip or something. I mean, really, it's like, you have to laugh to keep from crying, but it's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous, because I told my
supposed to do. And plus, you've got to keep it safe from the kids, because
they could grab it.
exactly. And if they grab it and something happens, then the parents are going to sue, and it's just a convoluted mess.
Yeah,
It is what it is.
but like I said, especially younger children, they imitate what they see.
That's right.
And so they have to have a positive influences in their lives. And I was there in the classroom. I tried to be as positive as I could.
Yes.
And without babying them, and helping them to be successful in their studies as well as in life. And I would even have to extend it to their parents.
Mm-hmm.
I would have to talk to the parents, especially as I got older, and the parents were like my son's age when he was a young man, like in his 20s. I would have to talk to him like I was their mother, and just talk to him kindly and tell him, you're not alone. I'm here. You got a lot of help. Just let us know what you need and we can help you. And like you said, Pam and Sharon, they just need to know that there's somebody out there who will listen to them and who will help them.
Right. And don't we all look and long for somebody that we can talk to and connect to? I mean, it's just so important. Dwayne says you can't be focused on teaching and half your brain on trigger anticipating what might happen. I know, and that's why we're all a little loopy, because I have to say, and I'm gonna be very transparent, the pandemic, I feel change from it.
Yeah.
I definitely feel change from it. I don't know how I feel. I am much more conscientious when I go out in group places. I'm looking, noticing my environment. I mean, you have to these days.
Yeah.
And yet I don't like that sense that I feel like I need to pay that close of attention. Because is that really being free, And they're saying that we can have all these guns for our freedom. I don't think so. I feel like we're locked in a box.
Yeah. I agree with Judy. Educators today are expected to be psychologists, social workers, and so on.
Yeah.
And I felt like that too, as well as the parent. But you know what? Sometimes though, you just have to be that reassuring voice. And
and I will say till my dying day, connections matter. We've got to be connected to each other. We've got to have relationships. We have to be kind to each other. It sounds so simple and so trite, but it is so very
basic.
It's basic. It's like all the things that we were supposed to have learned in kindergarten.
Right.
Exactly. Sharon, if you were the genie of all children and you had your magic wand and you had one wish to grant, what would it be?
that all parents had the money they needed to support their children and their families in a way that their kids could thrive.
Right. Yeah. I agree.
It would make such a huge difference.
I agree.
And we do have evidence based on that, based of the 10 million that got lifted out of poverty because we got into a pandemic, and we had a Congress that was able to push through stuff to make it happen.
Yeah, we learned so many lessons of the pandemic. We need to start using those lessons.
Exactly.
And putting them back into practice.
Exactly.
I'm amazed by how quickly we've started to move back to everything the way things used to be, including not investing in families. We saw, I don't know if you all saw it on the news, but last week there was a great big lobby day for access to childcare. We have a child care crisis too.
Yes.
And that's about putting more money in the hands of parents. Child care is incredibly expensive.
Oh,
we want parents to be able to go to work.
Right.
Access to child care actually also prevents abuse and neglect because it's developmentally appropriate care for kids. It often gives parents a break from the stress.
Exactly.
Parents.
Exactly.
And, in this country back in the 1970s, we passed universal access to child care. We did. And Richard Nixon vetoed it. But our Congress passed it. Both houses passed it, and he vetoed it. Almost every other developed country in the world not only has paid family leave, but they have child care available so that parents can go to work, and they understand that parents don't parent by themselves.
Exactly.
It takes a village, and to be able to go to work, it takes child care. It's part of what has to be there to support the workforce.
Right.
Exactly.
And it's just so common sense. But why isn't common sense common? That's what I want to know. Why? What is it about us that we have to be so contrary to what makes sense? Why do we have to make it hard for people to just live?
Well, I will say again that I think it's rooted in how our country's economic system was created. It was created using free slave labor, and we've gotten so used to being able to have our companies work in a way that they didn't pay a living wage to their laborers, and didn't provide the other supports that were necessary so that families could go to work and have their children cared for. I mean, we've got a state in this country that has just rolled back their child labor laws and are allowing younger kids to go to work.
I don't understand.
And I don't understand what it is, but it's that pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality and not understanding that our children's brains are still developing. We have a lot of educating to do about why that's so important.
So,
what group was that? What's that? Sharon?
It's either North or South Dakota.
Okay, one of the Dakotas. No wonder it flew under the radar because it's someplace that we don't talk about much. Let's see. Dwayne says, how can the richest nation on the planet be on the bottom of the most industrialized countries? The answer, Pam, is a greedy capitalist country.
Yeah. And just think about this. They were just talking about one of the top companies. The CEO makes $200 million a day.
For what? What are you going to do
with a day?
I think about how many people could be fed.
No, around the world. I mean, we could take care of a whole lot of issues. Couldn't we?
That's like I'm always amazed how when they start talking about the cost of social services, and they allow these people to become billionaires off of, like Sharon said, the hard labor of those who make not even $13 an hour. And they expect them to work like all they can give to that company so they can live in a life of luxury. And
I'm sorry to cut you off, Marcia. I keep hearing you say that in my head and our heads about how everything you think is based on really how we started.
Mm-hmm.
Our nation started, and that's mind blowing. And Marcia, you're really reiterating that same thing.
Yeah, and you just think about it. It's just always amazing to me when it comes to the average person or
Mhm.
people who are low income. They always have a whole host of excuses and reasoning in their own self on why these things can't take place. And when parents feel frustrated,
Mhm.
they're going to take it out on somebody.
Yeah.
And if they take it out on their children, and they may not want to be that, abusive mentally or emotionally or physically, but when you have that kind of stress in your life
Mhm.
and you don't seem to be able to get any help, like to me, I think it's just shameful that they would cut the SNAP benefits for parents and families to get the kind of money and resources they need to be able to have the food in their families' homes.
Mhm.
And then for them to try to figure out what to do with the child tax credit. That should be a no-brainer. That should be a no-brainer. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And yet they're always talking about the cost of it. I'm like, you're not thinking about the cost of what you want. I mean, when they decided they want certain things to bring back to their own state or what they could see for themselves to elevate themselves personally or professionally, I had no problem with the cost. But I notice it gets to be a cost-effective situation when it comes to the average Joe and Josephine. They got a whole lot to say about the cost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when I read that kind of money, I was like, who deserves that? Who deserves that kind of money?
Well, and I think part of
Factory making anything.
Mm-hmm. What were you going to say, Sharon?
I think part of our society is so focused on the individual that we don't see the systems. And we don't see how those systems interact and impact people. It's like Freedom said, how can someone pull themselves up by their bootstraps if they don't have boots on? And if you've ever seen the Resilience documentary, Dr. Shonkoff says, our children can't pull themselves up by their booty straps. It's just not possible. But part of it is that we so focus on what individuals can do and not on the systems that support us. And we don't see that the housing system is a part of this. The wage system is part of this. Our economic system is part of it. Our healthcare system is part of this. Our school systems are part of all these ecosystems that we interact with that can really hold people down, and they lift some people up in a big, big way, but others really get left behind. And we tend not in our society to see how those systems matter. We think everything is in the control if we just worked harder.
Yes.
And I don't believe that that's the case, because I think that the most marginalized and the poorest people in our society work harder.
Yeah.
Yes. The physical demands and the number of hours they work far exceed anyone who's making millions and millions of dollars a year.
That's right.
Not the same. It's different kind of work, but I think people work harder and they get less in return for it.
Right. Dwayne says Nixon was for universal income. I don't know, Dwayne. I guess you've looked that up. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know that, but I know here in Durham, we do have a program called Step Up Durham. And I think it's Step Up Durham, where they were giving people a flat amount of money. And most of these people have come out. They've come out of incarceration. And they were given some money, a set amount of money to help themselves. And they have found that none of those people have gotten back into trouble or anything with the money, because it was so here again, evidence-based scenario to show that poverty, even just if you're making a certain income or whatever, what you might not see as a whole lot to someone else, that hasn't had it, it really makes a difference to keep them out of trouble. So again, that there is an evidence-based solution. Yeah, yeah. Sharon, I will never forget what you said tonight about that, how we started economically. That because I've had several people. I've had 2 people on the show who have talked about reparations and things like that, and it's just making me think about all what was said in those shows and what have you. But ladies, our time is up. I have enjoyed you all so much, so much, and I'm so thankful that you all came on the show and shared your thoughts with us and opinions and knowledge, just wise words and good energy.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me. I really do. And I'm glad I got a chance to meet you, Sharon. And hopefully some kind of way we can connect and you can give me that information about the your organization here in Chicago.
Absolutely.
Well, you guys have each other's email address. I sent you the link.
Okay, cool. That's good.
And thank you, Pam, especially for bringing us on during Child Abuse Prevention Month.
Absolutely.
We need to raise awareness that this is a preventable, solvable problem.
Yes.
Just invest in families.
Yes,
exactly.
Yes. You really shared some serious nuggets. I learned so much. You know what? Sometimes I think, why did I do this show? Because I have these passions, right? It's a passion project. And then every time it's over, I'm like, oh wow, I'm so glad. So, anyways, I hope in the audience, I hope you will, and those hearing the show afterwards, after it's been live, I hope you will share it to other people so that we get more people knowledgeable about these things and thinking and what they can do to help prevent child abuse and so many other of our issues in our country. All right. Let's wave goodbye to everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.